Hello, and I'm really pleased to say welcome to this Purposefully Human webinar. And we're delighted to have this as one of a series where we get to speak to members of our community who have written books in order to share their knowledge and experience of not only why organizations should be human, but how to go about it. And that really resonates with us as a Purposefully Human community because we recognize that there's not a single way of being human. It's as varied as organizations are. And what we would really advocate is that they're intentional about the type of way they want to express human, but they think about how they do that and are purposeful in doing so. Not just because it's a nice thing to do, but actually because, as we'll hear today, it's actually essential to drive performance. This isn't about just being pleasant because it makes a nice workplace. This is actually very hard linked to the way that organizations work. And for those that don't get it right, there's a huge cost. For those that do get it right, there's enormous benefit. And that's really key to what we're trying to do with Purpose for Human, to make that case. And we do it through having a range of people that have taken the time to share their experience and really provide a blueprint, because I think many organizations understand that there's something they're not getting right, but very few know how to interpret that. And we'll hear from our guest today, Dr. Jennifer Nash, that she's been able to articulate that in a way that will really help them think about and put into practice the ideas of being human. Just before we move into introductions, a quick word about the format. What we want to do is try and create a conversational feel. And so we have a small number of guests joining us today and really just hope for an informal conversation amongst friends about a subject that we care passionately about. We are mindful that technology both enables this conversation because we're all in different parts of the world, but it also limits to an extent, some of the humanity of it. And as we go through this, if anyone's watching that and think, I know you're trying to make it human, but you haven't quite got it, we'd love to hear from you. This is something we're going to keep working on for months, if not years, about how do we get this technology to be more human. And we know we're not there yet, but what we've tried to do with this format is find a way in which we can feel a little bit closer and more connected to each other. But we'd love to hear from people about how are you making this technology work in a more human way. And so the format for today is I'm joined, I'm pleased to say, by my co-host, Amelia McNeilly.
Hi.
Thank you, Amelia. We met last year when Amelia and a group of friends were doing student consultancy along with me, looking at the human experience of a supermarket. And I'm really pleased that Amelia's kept that interest in the human experience going and has joined us today. I'm also delighted just to introduce Rebecca, Harriet, and Anna Louisa, and we'll invite those to ask some questions as we go through a little bit later. But we're here to hear the thoughts and experience of our guest, Dr. Jennifer Nash. Jennifer, welcome. It's a real pleasure to have you with us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, David. I'm so excited to be here and share, thoughts with your esteemed guests and everyone that might be listening today.
Fantastic. And I'm going to do the bit now. And in transparency, I'm going to read this bit rather than try and pretend I'm not and look down and you catch me out. I'm just telling you, I'm reading. So what you need to know about Dr. Jennifer Nash is Dr. Jennifer Nash is a leadership consultant and author of the award-winning and best-selling book, Be Human, Lead Human, How to Connect People and Performance. And I thoroughly recommend that book, by the way. She helps high-achieving leaders drive financial performance by strengthening communication and connection skills. I know that hugely undersells all that you've done and achieved, Jennifer. Is there anything you'd like to add to that would just help us understand your area of work and your interests?
I think you've covered it, David.
Okay, fantastic. So I'd love to know, what was the inspiration? I mean, committing to write a book is a huge undertaking.
Yeah.
Um, and I'd really love to know what drove you to write that book and share your experience and vision with everyone else and put it out so publicly, which of course many of us have thoughts about what it would take to be human, but to put it out
Mhm.
there for the world to see and to act upon is a real undertaking. I'd love to know what drove you to do that.
So there's a couple things that drove me to write this book. I think first and foremost, it's the book that I wish had been available for me to help learn how to lead when I started in the corporate world. There was no training. You just were said, oh, you're going to be leading some direct reports now. And so just figure it out. And I wish that there had been this resource back then. So that first and foremost, that's why I wanted to write this book. The catalyst for this book came about when I was working at Ford Motor Company here in the United States, and I had a leader there who was actually the CEO of the company, Alan Mulally, and he was the person who actually was the catalyst for me to set off on this journey of not only pursuing a deeper understanding of human behavior and human motivation, but what makes us tick and why do we do the things we do, particularly in an organizational environment. And none of that really made sense to me because I was coming from a dance and music kind of background into the business world because I spoke French. And so it was really a time for me where I was trying to figure out, like, why are people doing the things they're doing? What's causing this behavior? Why is there all this sports talk? And why are people, just throwing other people under the bus? And, why are these leaders doing these kinds of things? It just didn't make sense to me. So being in that space where I could see a leader for the first time in my career lead people first was astounding to me. And when you look at the fact that, Alan's leadership at Ford Motor Company during his tenure resulted in a 1,837% stock price increase, you have
Wow.
to ask yourself, there is power in leading human and being human at work. And so why is it that other organizations have so much trouble with this?
Thank you, sir. And it resonates so much because I think my interest in this subject goes back 15 years and really trying to understand why do organizations get people so wrong
Yeah.
and not care about that, not just in terms of the human side of it, but actually is how does it drive business performance? And there are a few shining examples where people have got it right, but they still don't seem bright enough to to really inform other people to say maybe that's what we should be doing. And the figure you suggest or mentioned about the growth in stock market prices is something you think, who's not taking notice of that? Who's not really keen to say whatever they're doing we should do, particularly in a company like Ford.
Mhm.
I guess that must have had some real challenges because I don't know the culture very well of Ford, but I'm guessing it's very hierarchical and perhaps traditional in its way of working at that time.
Yes, it was extremely hierarchical, and actually, it was very much modeled after the military. So it was extremely command and control, and everything was very siloed. Information wasn't shared, people weren't collaborating, and anyone that brought bad news up to the surface, messenger gets shot. So it was a very difficult place to feel that you had that safety, that psychological safety to be able to perform at your best, not only take risks, but just be in an environment where you weren't afraid that other people were going to throw you under the bus. So I would say, looking back, the economy at the time was, it was a really difficult time in the economy as well, right? And Ford had been in the position of really change or die. And so they brought Bill Ford, who was the interim CEO at the time, realized that he wasn't going to be able to transform Ford like he needed to. And so he brought in Alan to lead the company and lead the turnaround. And so I was working in the IT department at the time, and my department decided that they wanted to raise morale, for employees because it was a really difficult economic time. Things were really hard. And so the company didn't have much discretionary funding at the time. So they bought some like little paper plates and they bought some, markers and stuff, and they put them on these tables in the hallway in the building I was in. And they said, why doesn't everybody come down and fill out a plate and make an appreciation plate for someone, hoping that this would like raise morale, in the organization. So the intention was great. So I went down there and I'm thinking like, who am I going to make my plate to? And I just decided, I think I'm going to make it for Alan because he's got a really tough job right now. Number one, it's extremely lonely at the top of the house. And number two, he's trying to save this 100-year organization, that had just celebrated its 100th birthday, so that it could survive another 100 years. He had a very tough job ahead of him. And so I felt like he needed a little attaboy. So I created my plate for him and I decorated it with Superman stickers because that's what they had given us. And on the plate, I wrote, thank you for being the change that we needed to see so we could survive another 100 years. And I wrapped it up in an interoffice envelope, the kind that had the little twine on the outside where you made a little figure eight around it, right? And I put a sticker on it that said confidential and I stuck it on there and I dropped it in interoffice mail and I didn't think twice about it. Well, a couple weeks later, I get this summons down to my leader of leaders offices. And I'm like, well, this may not be good, right? Because, people were being let go left and right. I mean, this was a very bad economic time. And so I walk down to the office and I go in the office and there's a round table in the middle of the office and there's like three or four leaders standing there. And in the middle of that table is an interoffice envelope. And that interoffice envelope had been opened. And I looked at that envelope and I knew instantly what was in that envelope. And then I was just not very happy with the whole situation before they even started talking. And so they basically told me, look, we can't get this to Alan. We can't give it to him. I said, well, what do you mean? Like, did interoffice mail stop? Like, did we have to let those people go? Like, what's going on? And they said, no, this isn't appropriate. We can't give this to him. And, David, at the time, I was a little tired of my voice not being heard. And I was a little tired of this hierarchy that refused to allow change. And so I said, okay, so I took the envelope off the table, right? I guess I still had my job. And I walked out the door, out to my car. I got in my car. I drove over to World Headquarters. I went up to the 12th floor and I handed the envelope to Alan's assistant. And I asked Amy, would you please give this to Alan when he's in? Because he wasn't in at that time. And she said, sure. And so I dropped it off with her. I went back down, got back in my car, went back, to my office and continued working. A couple weeks later, I get a phone message on my voicemail. And this is when we were all going into the office every day, So I was in there and it's from Alan. And he's saying how much this plate meant to him and how he had a tear in his eye and that he just, he really appreciated me taking the time to give him this plate. And I was blown away because I'm like, wow, this guy, he's got all these things to do, way more important things than like take the time to appreciate me. And yet he took the time to send me a message. I'm like, wow, this is really cool. So a couple of other weeks go by and I get this like inner office package. And so I'm like, oh, inner office is still working. Great. And I see this inner office package and open it up and there's a whole bunch of Ford swag in there, which was really cool. But the most cool thing about that was that there was a letter in the package, and it was a handwritten letter from Alan to me, and it said, "Dear Jennifer," and around my name it had a heart. And he thanked me again for all that I was doing for Ford, and for essentially just for who I was as a person. Um, and I will tell you, David, that is the first time in a 16-year career at that point that I had felt like I was seen and I was heard and I was valued as a human being, not just as an employee for the output I could provide for Ford, but as the whole person who was coming to work and had all of these different facets to me. And that was the catalyst for me to go back and get my MBA and study organizational behavior and corporate strategy and understand, a little bit more about, human behavior. And then it also was the catalyst for me to go back and get my PhD and continue studying that as my focus of my doctoral research. And then that research led to the Be Human book, which you now see behind me on the wall. So it's a little bit of a long story, but that was really the catalyst because I felt like, well, if Alan can do this, how come other companies can't do this? Wouldn't everybody want to do this, right? Like it leads to results. It's not just a touchy-feely kumbaya, let's all hold hands and everything feels good kind of thing. Um, and so that's a little bit of a longer answer to your question, but I think it illustrates, how and the extent to which Alan was so effective at helping people feel like they were seen and heard in the organization. And when you look at engagement rates during his tenure, they went from 40 to 93%. That's unheard of. So you look at the stock price, you look at the engagement rates, you look at the results that that type of leadership enabled for Ford, which was a very much a command and control company. And you ask yourself, well, here's this amazing model. Let's try to replicate this and have other leaders do the same.
I just love the fact that that came from a moment of, and I hope I'm using the right term, stubbornness, a willingness not to be ignored. And
Yeah.
that whole story starts from that single moment. I think it, for me, it's hugely encouraging to say to other people, those moments literally change lives. When you decide whether you're going to put up with being told no or whether you think I'm right and pursue that. And this whole story and the fantastic book, the incredible work you're doing, just unfolds from that. And I think it's a really powerful thing about how a small change can have a huge impact, not just for you personally,
Mhm.
but also for the organizations that you then subsequently work for. And I think it's such a strong message. And I really commend you for that. Did you surprise yourself when you refused to accept? Because we know a lot does tend to get lost in middle management in
Mhm.
translation and conversion and assessment. But did you surprise yourself that you was prepared just to bypass all that and go to the top?
No, no, I'm not big on rules, and I particularly don't like unwritten cultural rules that don't make any sense. And so for me, it was just not acceptable. The fact that they opened it, the fact that they, had, we're not in a position to think outside the box a little bit and get outside of that status quo and outside of that comfort zone to allow someone to just show someone else that they were appreciating them. That did not compute for me. And it just wasn't an option. So, I start the book out by saying I've never been one for taking the road most traveled. And that's an example. No, that did not surprise me at all. I would not have been able to live with myself if I hadn't done that.
Fantastic. And it also dehumanizes the chief exec, doesn't it? It stops seeing them as a person who may just appreciate a gesture. But
Exactly.
yeah. Amelia, I know you've got a question. I'm going to hand over to you now.
Yeah, I was going to say, honestly, I really resonate with your journey and your story completely. Even though I've only been in my career now for just coming up to 2 years since graduating, so still a baby, still learning. But I think I have very much seen how just having, I guess it's the encouragement and like the morale boosting that you were talking about. And I guess the feeling of being seen and heard, and how much that can just change not only your personal work ethic and like personal worth, but also how much you can give back to a company. So like I worked somewhere, a smaller company, didn't have the same feel or drive, that I didn't feel like I was ever really seen. And then I moved over to where I work now, and it could not be different. And it almost took me back a bit because I wasn't used to being kind of, I guess, respected and trusted. And I was going to them with ideas like, oh, I think this would help. And instead of it sort of being like, oh, no, we don't do that. And like we were saying, this whole middle management rules, the unwritten rules area was, yeah, like, yes, please, can you do this? Can help us with this? Like, you're great. And it's just, even the first time, I remember when I was there and I heard them say, oh, you've done some great work. And I was just not used to saying that. I didn't really know, or like hearing that. But yeah, and I managed to do the quiz that was on your website, which was also really good. So I was kind of wondering, what did you learn kind of through the book that was unexpected, or perhaps challenged your own views about people and what it means to be human? Because I was quite surprised actually when I was doing the questions. One of my lower points, I won't say negatives, but lower points, was listening to people. And I feel like I could learn from that, but it was slightly unexpected. So I just wanted to know your perspective on that.
So, well, thank you for taking the quiz. I hope that it was helpful.
It was fun. It was a good lunch break.
Yeah. So, I think one of the things that surprises me the most is I often get the question around, well, how, this all looks good on paper, right? But how do we actually do this? How do we implement this? And I invite people to think about, like, this isn't like something that takes an immense amount of time. It's not something that you have to create a whole nother type of thing and spend 5 extra hours a day doing. You integrate this into how you do your work, right? The work is the reason why you have the interaction, you have the relationship. And the way you go about doing the work and the way you go about interacting with one another is that secret sauce. It is that human leadership. So a quick example, like you were talking about, Amelia, would be, someone said, I really appreciated the work that you did today. You did a great job. I really liked how, this proposal came out, or I really liked how you interacted with that client today. That takes very little time. But yet that result, right, that you said, oh my gosh, it's the first time that I heard that I was appreciated. And then I didn't really know what to do with it because I hadn't heard it before, right? Like, that didn't really take a whole lot of time, but yet it shifted your perception of how you are valued by that person and by that organization, right?
Yeah, and I think in terms of staff retention as well, because I know a lot of corporate companies have a huge issue with staff turnover. And for me, I'd always, in jobs, like, I'll be honest, if someone was to look at my CV, they'd be seeing like, and I am new to it, but it would be like 8 months, a year, not very long, because I guess I never had that feeling of like recognition. And I knew in myself, I was like, I work hard and motivated, and that wasn't being reciprocated. And I think for here, it was the first time where I went, I really want to stay here. Like, I was like, I have no desires to go anywhere. And that's such a relieving feeling compared to before.
Yeah. Yeah. And in addition to that feeling of just being, more at ease, in your space, you now have that psychological safety that that, oh, I can maybe take a little bit of a risk here and try something that maybe I wouldn't have tried before, or I may be able to, go in a different direction on this different project because I know that my leader has my back and they're going to support me in case I make a mistake or in case it fails and I, have to get back up and try again. So it changes your outlook on your perspective on what's possible as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Definitely. I've just noticed, is David jumped off the, I think, technical glitches.
Yeah, I think we lost David.
It's okay. I'm sure he'll come back in. Hopefully. But no, thank you. It's really interesting. And yeah, I'm kind of partway through the book, but I'm really looking forward to it. I'd not known too much until David introduced me to your work. And yeah, it's definitely, I think on the personal level as well, is that where I am at an early point in my career, being able to, like you were saying in your intro, how you wish that you had this book, back then, and when like you were just starting out. And to me, I'm like, this is great because it's almost like a Bible for corporate life and corporate leadership. So yeah, no, it's really fascinating.
So David has lost connection. So hi, Jennifer. I'm Rebecca.
Hi, Rebecca.
I'm actually David's colleague at Purposefully Human, so I'm on the leadership team. So I might just jump in, if that's okay. I facilitated a webinar with one of our other authors last week.
Okay.
And with a question, if that's okay, to get David back. I'm interested in one particular thing from your Forge story, and obviously that was a while ago.
Yeah.
The middle management is so often, you can have, and you do hear of a lot of CEOs you hear of a lot of CEOs that are not human, but you hear a lot of CEOs and executive teams in particular that espouse these values, but the cultural change gets bogged down in middle management.
Yeah.
Even though you had an outstanding CEO, you still experience the situation with middle management and senior management, obviously people high enough to stop internal mail, stopping your message getting through. What was how did the journey of Ford continue under that CEO's lead? I'm sorry, I've forgotten his name. The CEO,
Alan McNeilly.
Alan, under Alan's leadership. And was that problem with middle management, did that go away? Did that change over time?
I would say that it did. So Alan started in his CEO role in 2006 in September, and he retired in July of 2014. So this story that I'm telling happened around the middle of that time frame. So one of the things that Alan had integrated as part of his process was this BPR meeting, or the business planning review, and he would hold this meeting every week. And what he would do in that meeting is he invited all of the leaders for all of the different units to come into that meeting, and each leader was allowed to bring a guest. They could bring any guest they wanted. And so what ended up happening was, as the weeks went on, the leaders would come, right? And so there would be this ripple effect, because they would see how the culture was changing, how communication was happening, what was happening from a collaboration standpoint in that BPR meeting. And those new cultural norms would ripple down throughout the organization. So by the time, we got to 2014, that had rippled all the way down. I will also say that at the beginning, when Alan came in, he instituted new culture right away. So we had these parts that would be added to our badge. Like, you have your little badge you would badge in with, and there was a little card that was added to that badge, and on it said One Ford, and it laid out clearly what the expected behaviors are, how we're going to interact with one another, how we're going to treat one another, how we're going to collaborate, and why we're all doing this, right? It was One Ford, that was the vision. So he had done a lot of these different artifacts, like to help the culture shift, and then started putting those into practice. And I think the most powerful piece of that was having this BPR meeting where people would see and observe that, oh, my leader's not behaving like they were before. Oh, I'm going to stand up and take notice of that, because now that's expected of me, right? And it was brilliant in that way, because people that chose not to opt into that self-selected out.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh no, you go. It's fine.
No,
I was kind of just following on from that. So why do you kind of think that organizations act maybe in an inhuman way? I mean, just from what you were talking about, those hierarchical structures, and I'm just interested to know your thoughts on that. Sorry, I have a dog next to me that's being a pain. Slightly distracting.
So I think there's a couple reasons. I think first and foremost, when you think about the reason why organizations exist, they exist to make money, right? They have a product, they got to sell the product, and they exist to make money for the shareholders. So when you think about the origins of the company, there isn't a lot of human in that equation if you look at it from a numbers perspective, right?
Yeah.
You have inputs, you have outputs, and if you have a positive, you've got a net profit. If you have a negative, you have a loss. The Business Roundtable group a couple years ago decided that the primary objective of a corporation should not be to elevate and maximize profit for shareholders. It should be to elevate and maximize outcomes for all stakeholders. So what did that mean? Well, that started a trend, and we're still working on this, but that started the movement towards realizing that it's the people in the organization that create value for the organization. And without those people, you don't have a product. Without those people, you don't have profits or revenues. And so it takes a mindset shift It takes a reset of what we focus on as our primary objective in the organization. And it also takes a reset to the extent of something like COVID to make us shift how and when and where and why we work. Because we're looking at changing status quo.
Yeah.
And humans by nature don't like change. We like things to stay the same. We like things to be in harmony, and status quo typically for people is that harmony.
Mm.
When you have an outlier, the system ejects the outlier. And so you need to get that critical mass in order to have the system change enough so that that human focus is no longer the outlier. It's now the majority focus.
Yeah, and I guess that's that whole autonomy is the best practice in corporate world, and I guess that's why it gets its bad rep sometimes.
Yeah. Having said that, like, leadership leaders are who set the tone of the organization, right? They are who create the culture for the organization. And without that coming from top down, that messaging, it's very, very, very difficult to get something to change from the bottom up in an organization when it's so hierarchical.
Yeah, no, definitely. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Rebecca, do you have any other questions?
I do, but I was going to ask our other guests whether they
absolutely.
had any questions.
So I have
Yes.
tons of notes because I love to participate and talk. So I just take my notes to keep my mouth quiet. I'm learning to not interrupt. But I think it's really interesting. So like some stuff that jumped out at me, which I would love to emphasize and also get your thoughts back on, Jennifer, is so Amelia spoke about how she felt when she had it, and you spoke about how that made you feel. I think one of the things that's really interesting and that we can't forget is that Alan actually acted with what people today would label vulnerability. And he had, confidence to be honest and compassion and treat people as people. And one of the things I spend a lot of time working with boards and other senior executives and things, and have through various things. And one of the things you find is most people in the C-suite don't wake up saying, what harm can I do to the world today? They wake up saying, I'd like to be good and my best person. But sometimes it takes a little bit of a risk. Yeah. And it does take corporate trauma, which clearly Ford had been going through, to come in and be willing to take that risk, because sometimes the pressure comes back at you from the board or whomever else to do it. So I think we need to understand the support leaders also need. Not only how it makes people feel, but the support to give the leaders to feel comfortable, because we speak a lot about safe spaces, but one of the things that's really important is creating brave spaces also. That level of comfort to be brave and step out there.
I love that.
And just the one other thing, I'll jump in and then I'd love to hear your thing. And the business roundtable, I've been in the purpose space. I've been this is my space. And one of the things, the business roundtable, for those of us that have been in here, was almost sort of like yeah, well, of course moment. Right. However, to your point, things haven't changed. And what's changing things even more than that recognition in the business roundtable is people like us, what we're demanding of companies. And whether it's the employees, saying to your point, Amelia, I've been in all these jobs because I wasn't really happy and I'm not willing to be treated like that, which is a really big step up and a new way of thinking. And customers, because as Peter Drucker has said, the purpose of a business is to create a customer. But what people don't know is Drucker also said businesses are responsible for the resources of society. And we have to remember people are potential, not only a resource. So I think there's some interesting things. I have so many more things I'd love to add to this, but I'd love to just open that back up to you, Jennifer, to get your thinking.
Yeah, and I love that you brought up the vulnerability piece of the leader. I think, when people are asked what they think of as a leader, I think I cite this in the book. People typically draw an image of a man who looks very, very like, powerful and like, just really like railing at people. And it's that mindset, it's that image that we have that makes a leader that people think they have to role model, right? And so in an organization, when you want to climb that ladder, you're looking around you to get those cues of how you should behave, what you should say, how you should dress, how you should act, how you should think. And so we take our cues because we mimic. That's how we learn, right? From babies, that's how we learn. We take those cues that are the same in the organizational space. And so when we have leaders around us who continue to demonstrate that like command and control, I cannot be vulnerable because that could show me as weak and that's not okay mindset and behavior. Or I have to have all the answers because I'm the leader, right? I have to be perfect because I'm the leader, right? All of these literally outdated, limiting beliefs and mindsets that are holding people back from really embracing that other side of their leadership, which is actually more powerful. They just haven't realized that yet, right? So creating that space to hold the leaders and say, what do like you said, right? And letting them know that like it's okay to be vulnerable and you don't have to have all the answers. That is such a powerful thing. I have a client that I was working with last week who we just had that exact conversation actually, because he's like, wow, it's so liberating. It feels like I have this burden taken off of my shoulders that I don't have to be perfect anymore. I don't have to have all the answers. I don't have to be, the person that solves all the problems and fixes everything because things are so complex now. Like that's not realistic. And so enabling leaders to rethink and reimagine what that role of a leader looks like going forward and how they can lean into that and shape that for themselves is such a powerful opportunity for many organizations. I'm so glad you brought that up. Thank you.
So with that, did Ford change any of its performance metrics? Because clearly performance metrics are what often prevent middle management from behaving in a good manner. And we need to bring in more humanness indicators, as I think of them, and the things that create human potential. Did Ford alter some of its measurement stats? Because often, if that doesn't accompany other things, there's still sort of a little bit of a tension in there of, can I behave this way because will I make these other performance metrics?
Yeah. It was a long time ago, so I don't remember
But yeah, okay. It's fair.
if they had changed those. But I think that's a really important element because when you think about the fact that you are operating in a system, right? And you look at how performance management happens, performance management is broken. Just 100%, it's broken. We typically will evaluate people individually, yet we ask them to perform in a team. So when we look at how we measure and we look at how we ask them to behave and collaborate and interact, those are already at odds with each other. So performance management, I think, also has an opportunity to shift how we give feedback, shift how we ask for feedback, shift how we evaluate people. What are the key metrics that we're using to evaluate people? I don't know of any organizations off the top of my head that actually use like a human leadership type of index, like, you took, Amelia, to help them evaluate how their leaders are doing and where they are on that human leadership scale, right? Are they more towards that command and control end, or are they more towards this role of an evolving leader, like we've talked about, that is really more of a coach and a facilitator to help people perform at their best?
They should get them to all do the quiz.
I wish they would. I need the data set. Yeah.
Sorry for my little departure into the ether. I love that point you're making, Jennifer, about the gaps and between the perceived or desired on the organizational part and the as is in reality. There are so many, I think, examples of that in organizations. But I just wanted to invite Harriet. How you coming at this from a different perspective, don't you? You're from the finance world, trying to bring some humanity into that. So I'd love to hear your perspective on what you've heard so far.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just reflecting actually on how I have more recently managed to mostly, I guess, avoid organizational structures where there isn't this kind of openness to change and being more human, and be very sort of positive on the transformation and change and embracing stuff. And I find it really difficult now when I interact with companies that are almost like they are so driven by kind of silos and different tiers and different people terrified to say the wrong thing, make the wrong decision, take ownership. And yeah, I guess sort of the question around that is, how do you kind of you can't just get cross with people because they don't understand, they don't know any better. You can't tell them what to do. So, like, is there a way that you'd recommend of approaching it? And this is about, not being internal to an organization, but when you're kind of collaborating with them on a project or helping them to do something, to kind of go, I suppose a bit more gently, to kind of show and explain, etc., without, and especially if you're not used to that environment anymore, it's kind of like, how do you basically positively form a relationship where you can influence and change something when they're maybe not ready, or they haven't opened up to this before, I suppose is the point.
So I want to just make sure I understand the question, Harriet. So is it that you are serving in sort of like a consultancy capacity to this other group, and you have more of like this human leadership approach that you're using, but the client or the group that you're interacting with is more the command and control style?
Yes, yeah, that's a good way of summarizing. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, that's a great question. And I know that a lot of people struggle with that, right? When we have these different styles of interacting and these different styles of communicating, I think sometimes what's helpful is to lead with an inquiry approach. So it's sort of a reverse way of helping them see, like, hey, maybe there's a different way we can go about this, right? But you're sort of using the Socratic method to do that. So, if they ask you something, if they tell you, oh, you should do this and this and this, you can say something like, well, I hear what you're saying. Like, can you help me understand why you would recommend approach number one, for example, right? So, like, sort of building out that space for them to start to explain and share their thinking. And that will help build the trust as well, because they understand that you're interested. So I would love for you to try that and get back to me and let me know how that works.
Excellent. Yeah, I'll give that a go. I've got something coming up I can try it out with. Thank you.
Yeah,
That's great. I think, and I know it's part of what you did, Jennifer, but it's about really proving that it's good business sense, isn't it? That it impacts the performance. So it's not, let's say, I mentioned at the start, it's not nice to do. Actually, this affects the metrics that count to those. So it's not about trying to change the focus of business or distract them from what they're doing. It's actually just giving them an option to do it better. I'd like to invite Anna Louisa in. I don't know what perspective you're going to bring, Anna Louisa, because you always bring a variety of interests and curiosity. So I'm looking forward to your take on it or your question.
So there are 3 books that came to mind because I don't have yours, although I did take the survey and I loved it because it gives different dimensions. Humans need models, right? Or at least I need models. I need everything to fit in one page, canvases. But when thinking, and also all the work that we have been talking about in Purposefully Human, is that we have 2 ends of the spectrum, the organization and how we all have to interact. And the reason of organizations is that business, right? So that has to change, because I think capitalism is broken, one, for a variety of reasons, because it's not just the money that shareholders need, but stakeholders. And that is not just us humans and businesses. And, each one of us is not in our role as a human, customer, products, et cetera, but also the world, Earth. So that's one end. But on the other side, the fact that we have expected individuals to just fit into a rigid command and control, or what culture, whatever it was. If you fit, cool. If you don't, bye-bye. So there are two different axes and two different spaces to work with. So much work to do, right? So I keep thinking like I said, there were three books that I keep going back to. One is The Heart of Business by Herbert Hilley from, ex Best Buy CEO. And he showed right there, wow, you can have good results, big company, but be super focused on the human. And then Mariana Mazzucato has always she's an economist who has pushed the idea of this stakeholder capitalism, because the way that we're practicing capitalism is broken. And then the third one, which just came to mind when you kept talking about command and control, is Frederic Laloux, who wrote Reinventing Organizations, and how at each moment of evolution in humanity, hopefully, we awake to a higher level of consciousness. This is what he says, right? So putting those three together, each one of us humans, fully human, with our emotions, with our good days and bad days, with our uniqueness, contribute to a collective, not because that collective is just gonna be making money, which, by the way, is not gonna benefit you individually, but it's hopefully going to benefit everybody. This is what keeps holding me, and I wonder if I am going to find that with the model that you present. I think that the different dimensions that you asked in your survey gives me an individual model that I can practice, but also for leaders to start practicing it without putting themselves out on a limb, because the world of business is still the world of business, right? So that was a long tartine, as we say in French. The different pieces of the pie, and depending on where you are, which one do you pick? Because it's like you're creating a movement, right? And we are all responsible for it from wherever we are. Yeah, I always leave organizations because I don't like working in places that don't let me be me, fully human. So.
Well, I love that perspective, Anna. Thank you for sharing that. And I think the framework, the model that you're talking about is what I call the humans framework in my book. So there are 6 dimensions to that model, and it's held together by relationships, which are the glue that power that framework. So that is one aspect that, for people who are into models, that may be something of interest for them. The other model that I have in my book actually is the strategic framework of human leadership, which is a triangle that has 3 sides. And the one side is the strategic focus, the bottom leg is the relational connection, and the other leg is the human element. So that's another model that may be of interest to you as you're exploring human leadership. I also wanted to touch on a point that you just made around, like, I don't like to work for organizations that don't allow me to be fully human. And I think if there's anything that came out of COVID that was positive, it's that we have this shift now where, like Amelia was saying, like, if I don't like how things are happening, I'm going to vote with my feet, right? And I'm going to go find an organization that I can be fully myself, that appreciates me, that recognizes me, that values me, and where I feel I can bring my full self and all of my talents to bear on that organization. So when you think about it from that perspective, and you have younger professionals coming into the workplace with this mindset, there is a war for talent out there, and organizations that are on the cutting edge of looking at employees as their, people create value, their primary focus, and treating them as such, they are the ones that will be winning the talent war, right? They're the ones that will have the top talent coming to them and looking to work for them. So I think it's a strategic opportunity for organizations today to also think about, where do they want to be on that talent spectrum? Do they want to be that employer of choice where they put people first and, everything else falls into place? Or do they want to stay stuck back in, 2019, where we still had a lot of command and control going on?
It's really interesting. What do you think is the most impactful action that doesn't require permission or a budget, that people could take to organizations or management, you think would make the biggest difference?
An action that would make the biggest difference in engagement, or
Yeah, and I guess not just engagement in a broad sense of the term. So engagement with staff, engagement with customers, and retention, and also people just being happy and wanting to show up to work and enjoy work, and not get the Sunday scaries feeling, thinking, oh no, I've got work on a Monday morning.
Yeah. There is so much research around the different elements of the humans framework in each of those dimensions and how that impacts our psychological well-being in the workplace, as well as our emotional well-being. I would say, like, based on the research I've done, that the single most thing that organizations can do to help people in that way is to help them feel understood and to help them have their voice heard. And when people feel that they are understood, they will return that back to you many times over. It's also a question of belonging. So if they feel understood, they feel like they belong, they have a place in that social community that makes the fabric of the organization.
Yeah. No, thank you.
Becca,
Yeah,
I'm sure you've been sitting there with many questions swirling
I
through
do
your head.
have a question I'm busting to ask. I feel like I feel really old when I ask this question, and I think I'm just becoming old and cynical. What continues to inspire you, Jennifer? You told us about the start of your inspiration, but what continues to inspire you and give you hope that things are changing and that will change sooner rather than later? Because there are still tens of thousands of leadership courses and theories and all of that sort of thing, and so many of them don't make any difference. And we go to leadership conferences and we hear the same thing over and over again. What continues to inspire you and give you hope?
Honestly, it's the work that I do with my clients. I have the opportunity to hear firsthand what they're going through. They're in these systems that are just really challenging for them. They're maybe in that mindset of, I've still got to have all the answers. I still have to be perfect. I've got to be that leader that, is like telling people what to do, because otherwise, if I don't tell them what to do, they think I don't know what to do. And then I'm weak. And then they want to avoid that at all costs, because then it changes their perception, and then that impacts their promotion. And it's a systemic thing, right? And so when I have this opportunity to be coaching clients one-on-one, I get a firsthand look at that, right? And I get a firsthand look at where things are. Is the needle moving at all? And with some organizations, I see that it is moving. With other organizations, I see it's not moving like it could be. And so the progress that I see with the clients that I have the opportunity to work with gives me hope that things are changing. And I think, as Amelia's generation comes in and Harriet's generation comes in, and they continue to move up that ladder because they are looking at things differently. They think about things differently than our current middle leadership does, our current senior leadership does, our current C-level executives do. That by itself will change, right? And so it's going to take some time,
Yes.
I think, for most organizations to get there. But the ones that are open to thinking differently and the ones that are open to behaving differently will see their performance just skyrocket, and they will not have any issues with talent attraction.
That's a great point. And I think one of the things we've reflected on quite a bit within the community is how do you create that movement that actually has impact? Because it struck me that with technology has really been around 30 years as a mainstream. And I think when it started out, it was the geeks and nerds, and it was this curiosity to one side, and you kind of, but they now dominate. And I was at an event recently, and it was saying about what does the workplace of the future look like? And it was just which variety of technology is going to dominate. And it was quite ironic because we're sitting around in tables discussing it in person, enjoying each other's company, meeting new people. There wasn't a human framed option which said people will or people may. It was all about the technology. And I just thought, I think if you, within organizations, we've always had people, organizations are inherently people. So why is it we've not created that impact and change that technology's achieved in such a short space of time? So I think picking up on your point, Rebecca, I mean, I'm hopeful that by these sort of events, by amplifying the noise we can all make, by working together, and actually as a group being much more ambitious and demanding, we can accelerate that change because inherently it has to be about people. And as Anna Louisa said, our impact on society as organizations, because that actually feeds back into the people that come into organizations. So I think there is an opportunity to be really optimistic. And so we can learn from what other movements have done, but we must also learn what hasn't happened, because I think when you look at some of the DEI, some of the human resources, they've got lost a little bit, and there are probably reasons for that. But we have an opportunity to reform and think differently. And I think just get out there and really normalize the idea that the human perspective is part of the conversation. So I'm really mindful we're coming up to the end, and I've got so many questions that I could keep asking you, Jennifer. I mean, I really love that bit about relationship. I think that really feels like the heart of this, about taking the time not to see the chief exec, but just to see the person who's doing the job of the chief exec and those aspects. I'd like to invite, is there anything you'd like to really, from the conversations or something we've missed, is there anything you'd like to leave as a parting thought for us?
There's so many different things based on what we've talked about today. It's hard for me to choose just one. I think what I would invite your listeners to go away from this conversation with is, how are they leading today? Do some reflection. How is that working for them? How is that working for the people around them? And what is one thing that they could do to shift their leadership to be more human based on what they've heard from this conversation today?
Fantastic. Well, I'm going back to your moment at Falls, and I'm thinking, be more Jennifer. That would be the tip. So we are coming to, where can people find out more about your work, Jennifer?
Yeah, so if they'd like to learn more about my work, they can go to my website. It's drjennifernash.com. That's drjennifernash.com. They can pick up a copy of Be Human, Lead Human, the book behind me that they're seeing. They can take the Human Leader Index, which Amelia and others have mentioned today. And Anna as well. Yes, thank you. It's available complimentary on my website. And I also have just launched a Human Leader Masterclass for organizations that are looking to elevate and upskill their leaders and managers and individual contributors.
Fantastic. Jennifer, thank you so much for the time and all your work you're doing. It's really appreciated and greatly inspiring. And also thank you, Amelia, for being
thank you. I've had a blast, honestly.
Particularly for my disappearing whilst I went away somewhere. And I'm not sure I went, but thank you for picking up. Rebecca, Anna Louisa, Anne, and Harriet, thank you so much for joining us. And I hope you've all found it useful. And we look forward to seeing you again very soon.